there are things that are simply not what I think normal people do. And once on the way to Brussels for this 2018 summit, he then went on to see Theresa May in London, and then went on to the Helsinki summit with Putin. So he walked out of the White House and on his way to the helicopter to Marine One, and he stopped, as he often did with the press, talked about the trip, and he said, I think the meeting with Vladimir Putin might be the easiest meeting of all. He said, who would have thought of that? And the answer is nobody except Donald Trump. Um, I mean, just to go from the sublime to the ridiculous, at one point we were supporting Juan Guaido as a legitimate president of Venezuela against Maduro and the military junta that essentially surrounded him. Maduro had threatened Guaido's families, and he had imprisoned his chief of staff. And so we arranged a visit for his Guaido's wife and the wife of the chief of staff, who was being held in a particularly brutal Venezuelan prison. They came into the Oval Office. We had the press in. Trump was very gracious with them. He listened. They told the stories of how Mrs. Guaido's children had been intimidated by Maduro's thugs, how the wife of the chief of staff had seen her husband dragged out of their home, put in prison. Really, I think, quite helpful to get across to the American people why we were with Guaido against Maduro. And so the meeting ended, the press left, they were escorted out. I went out with them. I went back in to the Oval to see Trump. And I said, I think I wanted to say I thought that had been a really very effective, very helpful thing in support of Guaido. But before I could get that, he said to me, did you notice she didn't have a wedding ring on? And I thought to myself, what? This that, but this is Trump in action, and I could go on at length. Well, I had met him before the 2016 campaign. I'd met with him during the campaign, right before the foreign policy debate with Hillary Clinton. I met with him several times after he became president, before I joined the administration. Uh, uh, I think I heard everything about him that anybody else in America could have heard. I don't think I have any illusions. Very few people have ever called me naive. So I think, at least I thought at the time, I knew what I was getting into, because I also believe that, like every one of his 44 predecessors, Trump would be disciplined by the gravity of the responsibilities that he had, at least in the national security space, and the implications, the seriousness of the consequences of his decision would provide a form of discipline. And you could have, even with somebody like Trump, an orderly discussion of options and make decisions that way. And it just turned out that I was wrong, that the weight of the responsibilities did not discipline him. And that was true during the entire 17 months I was national security advisor. I was a fellow named George Conway. You may have seen him on TV. It was Kellyanne Conway's husband, very, very negative on Trump over the years. And so he told the story. He and Kellyanne, then his wife, Steve Bannon, and Trump in a motorcade out to Long Island after the election in 2016, but before the inauguration. They said they're driving along, and somehow my name came up. He said Trump went on for 15 minutes about the mustache. I, you know, I can laugh at it now. It doesn't make any difference, but this is the man who was the leader of the free world for 4 years and could be again. Well, I think the main concern should be what he would do in Ukraine, what he would do with respect to NATO, and
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear to me, at least, that withdrawing from NATO is a very likely in a second Trump term. And I think he said, with respect to Ukraine, basically he could solve it in 24 hours, which is ridiculous. He'd get Zelensky and Putin into a room and resolve it, which is probably also pretty silly. But if it failed, of course, it wouldn't be Trump's fault. It would be somebody else's fault by definition. And my fear is it would be Zelensky by default, because certainly his good friend Vladimir Putin wouldn't be at fault. So there are a lot of ramifications, a lot of other issues on which Trump's performance, I think, would be troubling. But in the immediate future, with respect to the UK, I think those are the most salient. What Trump believes is he can make a deal out of anything. He can make a deal with Ukraine and Russia. He can make a deal in the Middle East. He thinks he can make a deal with Kim Jong-un, with Xi Jinping on trade. I mean, it's everything is a deal for him. What the terms are, almost irrelevant because he wants the credit for having made the deal. And I will say in diplomatic circles, when somebody says we have reached agreement on an international issue, people say, "Oh, it's wonderful," and then they say, "By the way, what are the terms of the deal?" So Trump is really like diplomats in certain respect, is the deal is more important than the substance to him. And that's a big mistake.